Hi, Richard.
Hi, Brian.
Excellent. Another week, very exciting week. This time we have something very interesting to address, I'd say, rather than comment, because there are many years of experience seeing the same circumstances actually prevent making decisions to company with something that is very needed in terms of how they can grow, they can establish their operations, their controls, the monitoring, the assurance, but actually this particular uh, box is still always there, but actually never properly addressed, I'll say. And I think it's a good time to come to it.
Yeah. Um, this topic is near and dear to my heart
Right,
because it actually was part of the origin story of why I even began to build Trinity in the first place.
right.
And I'd like to call it out and address it because it's one of those things that is known
Yeah,
but rarely actually addressed. So I'm
right.
going to call it out, and I have a little bit of material to share with everybody.
Yeah,
And I'd like to just go through this, and next week we can begin into some more system related benefits.
excellent.
Okay, so I'm just going to share a presentation that I've got, and I'm going to enlarge that.
Yeah. Okay, it's coming up and we have full screen now. Perfect.
Okay, I've given this the title "Breaking the Curse."
Right,
All right. And we'll talk about what the curse is in a second.
right,
And the subtitle, Designed Differently, Delivered Differently.
right,
And I want to make a case for how those are true when it comes to breaking the curse.
right.
Now, this might shock you a little bit, but
Hmm.
this is facts. It's plain and simple. Our industry, enterprise software, ERP, EAM, has failed its operators historically.
Right.
Did you know that up to 75% of ERP and EAM projects fail? They fail to deliver on time, on budget, get integrated, and be adopted by you. They fail.
Yeah.
Does that
No,
surprise you?
indeed. Yeah. And I'm coming from a company or two companies that have very large projects that actually are well known that never delivered.
Yeah.
We're not going to mention
Not
them.
only that, even worse is that nearly one in five, 20%, are abandoned entirely
Right.
before it ever even gets into operational execution.
Right.
Now, these failures happen even with blue chip legacy brands, experienced vendors, and glowing references
Yeah.
for those products, right? It's become a known fact, and it's rarely, if ever, called out.
Right.
Personally, I have an opinion on this, and I think it's ridiculous. Um, my opinion on the situation is that that level of catastrophic failure is totally unacceptable and would never be tolerated in any other profession. Just imagine if 20% of surgeries or financial audits or legal cases were simply abandoned halfway as an oops, didn't work.
Right.
Just imagine that,
Yeah.
right? Imagine if the failure rate to get the outcomes in the time that you expected at the budget that you expected was experiencing a 75% failure rate to get
Mm.
what you paid for, right?
Yeah.
To get what was promised,
Yeah. Yeah.
to get the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. That's all you're asking for on time, on budget, integrated into operations.
Yeah.
These should be the minimum, not a miracle. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be that 20% amongst all of these projects that are going on. It should
Yeah.
be the minimum. And I believe that the bar of success has simply dropped far too low.
Right.
The true causes of these failures, I mean, there's many. There's many, but let's talk about the top ones. And one of them that is very, very common, it's actually led to a number of legal cases. Everybody's welcome to go out and do a little bit of Google research on, legal cases that have been brought up because of this simple topic.
Yeah.
Sales promises that don't match delivery reality.
Yeah.
Right? When you have a sales force out pounding the pavement and trying to, get people committed,
Yeah. Yeah.
their end goal is to get that signature on the PO. And
Yeah.
then it passes on to a technical team that have to deliver. Very often those two perspectives of what that company needs are going to be quite different, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a very common thing that's just known is, can you trust the salespeople? I mean, we talk from a sales perspective as well,
Yeah.
but this is something that is one of the main roots of those failure rates, is that what we were promised was very clear, and what we're being delivered is not what we were promised. That
Yeah.
leads to many, many failures. And those ones especially are acrimonious and lead to lawsuits and bad feelings all around. And there's very few people out there in business that we would be addressing who aren't aware that there is a fairly consistent habit in our space
Yeah.
of accepting that failure is entirely possible. It's ridiculous. Anyway, no executive ownership is another one. You might have an operational person who wants certain benefits from a tool and
Yeah.
pushes a project forward, but you have to have executive ownership and sponsorship. It has to be top down. And that isn't just the responsibility of the customer. That's our
Yeah.
responsibility as the provider to make sure that we've got that, right?
Yeah.
Poorly executed change management. This is one of the most significant elements of any kind of technology transformational project and stuff like that. And yet it's not talked about quite so much. People talk about the implementation.
Yeah.
They talk about the cost, the data, transformation and implementing workflows and all that other kind of stuff. Having people change the way they work in any way, shape, or form has to be carefully managed. It has to be recognized as a challenge.
Yeah.
It has to be managed carefully, right? Otherwise, poor change management immediately leads into the next cause, which is weak training and weak support for the users, who
Yeah.
will ultimately determine the success or failure of that project.
Right. Right.
Right. And another thing would be, and this typically comes from back to the sales promises, is unrealistic scope and timelines.
Right.
Okay. So really, our customer base out there doesn't fear change, going from having no system to having a system. They fear history
Yeah.
with those kind of statistical failure rates.
Right.
Who
Right.
can
Right.
blame them? Right.
Yeah.
Now, I believe, and because I put in the time, that Trinity is, first off, architecture, it's designed differently so
Mm.
that we can take responsibility for what others tend to ignore. Misalignment, poor adoption, weak change management, over complexity.
Right.
We don't leave those to the customer and just say, you're bad,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We own them. We own them, right? Who else
Yeah.
can? I mean, we know our product better than anybody. Who
Right.
else can own those challenges, right?
Yeah.
Implementation itself and ease of change. If a customer sees that they want something modified, or
Right.
they decide they want a different workflow, et cetera, et cetera. And many of those things kind of happen throughout a project implementation, right?
Right.
However, when you code a piece of software, it can be functionally correct, but that doesn't mean that it's been built right into the code, rapid implementation,
Yeah.
easy to get it up and running, and also ease of change. Just think about a workflow engine that becomes quite static, right? And later on, the business decides they want to change their workflow. you know, something along those lines, or you learn something new about their business model. Um, you have to have extra code. Let's just put it that way. It has to be designed into it that you could easily change a workflow
Right.
without causing a total disaster.
Yeah.
Right? Utility and ease of use guided absolutely every step of every feature that we built.
Right.
We took into account 30 years of experience of running into roadblocks and difficulties and issues
Yeah.
during project
Yeah.
implementation and made sure that we engineered them out of the whole, you know, implementation
Right.
and
Right.
execution. We
Yeah.
didn't find a new way to manage them. We tried to engineer them into non-existence.
Right. Right.
Right. So this is what's funny. Like when people think about putting in software to simplify things, right? Nobody can promise to simplify your business model. It is what it is, right? Your sales cycle is what it is.
Yeah.
Your product is what it is. You're already operating, right?
Yeah.
The best we can promise is to add value to that, identify inefficiencies, you
Yeah.
know, identify strategies for improvements, um, deliver some transparency where you didn't have any before. This
Right.
is why it's important that you have to have a strategy layer, or all that operational stuff that's going on isn't really connected to how the business and that needs to be run,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And then you get not just to the design of the product, but what about the delivery of the product?
Mm.
Okay. We boldly put proof before payment.
Right.
Unlike the traditional model, which is typically a large deposit before anybody's going to start spending their resources on you, right?
Yeah.
And then you might have, excuse me, you'll have lesser payments as you go on through milestones and that kind of stuff, but you got to come up with a big chunk. And companies are very hesitant to, to walk away from that initial investment
Yeah.
that they put in, right? We've flipped the entire equation
Right.
with our 90-day risk-free certainty program, which is a real implementation. We don't invoice unless we've delivered to success criteria that was agreed at the beginning with the
Right.
customer. Plain and simple. We put skin in the game and we work together with the customer to get the outcomes that everybody agreed on.
Yeah.
And it's that simple. Let's not worry about, well, I want some of my deposit. No, all the way through the 90 days are going to be milestones that can be signed off, that can be agreed. And if
Right.
at any stage it's not what they wanted, it's not what they thought they were going to get, it's not going the right direction, we either negotiate a resolution or we walk away as
Right.
friends.
Yeah.
And I think that that is an unheard of, for a company like us. Knowing the traditional failure rates, I
Yeah.
also am very, very well aware of how to manage those situations, right?
Right.
How to
Right.
manage that into it not being a problem. It's just a task, right?
Right.
Managing change is just a task. It shouldn't be, a barrier, right?
Right. Right.
Also, our implementations are entirely outcome driven. Every feature maps to measurable performance or compliance goals
Right.
that are called out up front.
Yeah.
And as a little kicker, we offer our champion service. Okay.
Mm.
Now, what that is a fractional sysadmin. One of the reasons that I've run into in the past, especially with SMEs that are growing, right,
Yeah.
and MMEs that are scaling up, is that you introduce something like Trinity and they immediately believe, well, we need to add a head count to administer this,
Right.
right? And maybe their existing people are just too busy to take on the learning curve of a whole new software platform.
Yeah.
So something's got to give there, right? It's not just your project that costs them money, but it's also going to be resources.
Right,
right?
right.
And that's part of the whole change management of implementing a system. And
Yeah,
we don't underestimate that. However, we do offer as a service a fractional system administrator, your
yeah,
champion. They learn your business and are expert in our software,
right.
right? They can be temporary or permanent,
Yeah,
right? Temporary in terms of, it may take longer to train up a sysadmin than it
yeah.
is to train the users,
The users,
right?
yeah,
Because that isn't, yeah, it's a super duper user. It's a higher bar that the
yeah,
sysadmin needs to understand, and yet, in throwing that into the project, um, is only going to add delay time to when your
right.
users could use
Yeah,
some of the simpler features and roll them out. Instead,
yeah,
you have to wait until the sysadmin masters an entire learning curve. And sure, they could do it eventually, but
yeah.
let's get that barrier out of the way.
Right, right.
It's not in the top five, but it's one of the causes that leads to difficulty and failures. Is
Yeah, or adoption.
some That's right. That's right. The whole
Yeah,
thing. Adoption is also one of the, that's a stage
yeah,
of success.
yeah,
Um, but a fractional sysadmin just basically means you're not going to pay for a full head count,
yeah, yeah.
right? Because it's economies of scale, it's efficiency through expertise that
Right.
our sysadmins, they basically represent your interests with
Yeah,
regards to the software that they understand very, very well.
right.
They don't have to address the learning curve. They just learn about your business. And the
Yeah,
whole time through the project, they're learning and learning and learning and making sure that their supportive role
yeah.
goes beyond call us when there's a problem,
Right,
right?
right.
They will actively go in there and help manage the environment with you.
Yeah,
And
excellent.
depending on the needs of the business, you may decide to continue with that service or transition it to an in-house, something along those lines. But
Yeah,
we do offer that as part of the implementation.
excellent.
Final words. I just want to
Hmm.
make it clear.
Yeah,
It is not a sales ploy, our approach. It is a commitment.
right.
It's that simple. We're willing to put real skin in the game. Are you? Are
Yeah,
are our customers, right? We're happy to put in like for like, and we work together as partners to get awesome outcomes,
yeah,
right? We built it so it could be manageable. We engineered out a lot of problems that have been my experience in this space over the last 30 years.
yeah.
And I'm confident enough that we've managed to achieve that we're able to make that offer and put
Right.
skin in the game right along with them. And that's
Excellent.
all I had to say today.
That's fantastic because actually as far as I know, I never, the usual um free trials that actually are abandoned
Mm,
halfway because people have their own activities, commitments and responsibilities, so they don't have any time or resources to learn something new, just to try to say, is this going to be a solution for us as an
yeah.
organization? Or the proof of concept that many times I think that they are a kind of a stage theater proof of concept because actually you have selective data that actually works perfectly in a control environment. And
Hmm.
also it's a kind of deceiving in a way. It's not a purposely deceiving, but actually seems to be like, oh yeah, well, okay, works. But actually prove perhaps uh, one business case. But then when you start to put in real implementation, when it goes and merge with all the other circumstances of the company, that business case literally are neglected, if you may, because actually was literally in a kind of a glass bubble proof of concept. But
Yeah.
now we are in something completely different. So this is a real implementation with a real business with real data. So actually, this is something very, very. I don't know any company that can provide this so far.
I just think it should be industry standard, quite
Yeah,
frankly.
yeah,
It's a very it's a complicated animal.
Yeah.
And by no means can we promise to address everything in 90 days. That's
Yeah.
impossible,
Yeah.
right? What we can do is commit to knowing what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
To understanding your business, assessing your needs, assessing your priorities,
Yeah.
and agreeing to how far do we need to take it
Yeah.
to establish trust.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that would be the end of the relationship, and I can promise you a 1 year implementation in 90 days. And I'm not saying that it's going to take 1 year. I'm just saying with a larger operation, with complex business model, if they're adopting absolutely every feature, it would be impossible to do it in 90 days.
Right.
Impossible.
Yeah.
But where can we deliver the most value quickest,
Yeah.
depending on their priorities and our understanding of our product and
Right.
the difficulty of addressing certain things?
Yeah.
We are responsible for defining that scope and delivering it. And it's just that simple. And as far as all of the other factors that cause failure, if you're not managing risk as part of a project implementation,
Yeah.
if it's not transparent, if it's not being addressed, then you're not doing anything properly. That's the
Right.
beginning of the end,
Yeah.
right? So it's just through those mechanisms that we can have, of course, there's a bit of a risk to us, of course, but it's a small calculated risk.
Yeah. It is. I think it's a risk of committing. As any commitment, you're risking something always. But it's a good risk, I believe.
Yeah, I agree, 100%.
Right.
Anyway, that was something that I wanted to call out is
Yeah.
recognize that those historical failure rates exist. They absolutely do. I've been there. I've seen it. I've been held responsible for it for 30 years because, quite frankly, those kind of statistics give all of us a bad name.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it. And I challenged myself. It was very, very simple. It was a conscious decision. I asked myself, um, I tend to have an audience in my head that I have conversations with, which might be a little bit nuts, but I asked myself if it could be done differently. And knowing the
Right.
design of other products that I've worked with over the years and been active on many, many projects, my answer was a resounding, yeah, that could be done differently. It could have been made easier.
Yeah.
It just isn't. And the next question was, well, do you think you could do better?
Right.
And my answer to that also was yes. So that brings us to today. It was many years and many man hours later,
Yeah.
but here we are. And I look forward to actually proving the proof.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I think it's a good closing statement. Like looking forward to prove this. So I think that we are done for today.
Great.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time, friend. Talk to you
Thank
soon.
you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.